let's talk about the cell. This is just a brief intro to the cell. You watched a couple videos on the microscope and the history of the microscope, that sort of thing. So of course, and the cell theory is just that living things are all made up of cells, right? So living things are made of cells. So they're basically the smallest unit of living things. And they come from pre-existing cells by cell division. Now you saw in the lab, you saw what the first guy who discovered cells, he was looking at the same thing you guys are looking at, a piece of cork, right? And basically it looks like somebody called it a mesh. And what's happening in cork, of course, is there was a cell in here at one time. There was a cell in there at one time, but it died and it dried up and now it's gone. And all that's left is something called the cell wall. Now, tonight you're going to watch a video that talks about the cell wall and the cell membrane. Defines what it is. The cell wall is what wood is made of. Wood is actually made of cell walls. The cells are gone now. They've died and they're gone. But the walls of the cell are still there, and that's the wood. It's made of cellulose. Right? But what is a cell anyway? I made this water balloon just to illustrate it. This is basically a pretty good model of a cell. It's got a very thin membrane around mostly water. Your bodies are 78% water, and that's when you take into account your bones and stuff like that. So cells are mostly water. They're just a bag of water. Now inside of this bag of water, of course, is going to be the nucleus and endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi apparatus and all different parts, the mitochondrion. We're going to talk about in section 3 of this book, all the parts of the cell. But this is the basic idea. Now, of course, your body's made of like trillions of these things. Trillion cells or something like that. I think it's a trillion. And your skin is basically made up of layers of these things. And they're all joined to each other with different connecting fibers and stuff. And there's all different types of cells in your body. Red blood cells don't look exactly like this. They look more like kind of a flattened thing with a kind of a dent in the middle. Yeah, I don't want to pop it. Yeah, they're kind of flat. There's other muscle cells are long and thin, and they're all lined up to each other so that they can contract, shorten. So all the cells are different, but they're all basically the same idea. Even a plant cell is like this, except in a plant cell, it's also surrounded by the wood, by the cell wall, which is rigid and made of cellulose. So there's something else on the outside of a plant cell. It's like you take this balloon and put it in a box. That's a plant cell. Take this balloon, put it in a box, and squash it so it's all full inside the box. Right? Now, what this thing is on the outside, this is called the cell membrane, and that's the subject of section 2 in your book. And that's what the video is about tonight. It's like a 5-minute video or something. The guy talks about what a cell membrane is, what a cell wall is, and how it works. And they spend a lot of time on it because the whole idea is, well, let me draw this first of all. This is a cell. The two kind of main parts of the parts you see first are the cell membrane. That's the outer boundary of the cell. Outer boundary of the cell. And then inside is what's called the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm. It's mostly water. I'm going to say water plus other cell parts, which we will talk about. This is, things like DNA are going to be in here, and the nucleus, and all that kind of stuff is on the inside. Now, the important part of the cell membrane is that basically that's what makes a cell a cell. That's what divides the cell from the rest of the world. And it lets certain things through and certain things in. certain things in and certain things out. So let's just say that the cell membrane, for now, I'll just say this, it divides the cell from the outside world. It lets some things in and keeps some things out. Certain things in and out. So it lets certain things in and out of the cell. It's going to keep, it doesn't want just everything. I mean, think about this. If this thing was just 100% permeable, anything could go in and out, then why even have it? Because that means even the parts of the cell could go right out. You don't have a cell. If you don't have a membrane, you don't have a cell. Okay? If the membrane let everything through so that the nucleus and everything could pass in and out, then where would the cell be? So the purpose of the membrane is that it only contains certain things. Now here's the thing. Here's the question I want to mention before I finish here with this introduction. Why are cells so small? So cells are microscopic. How come, for example, why aren't we just one big cell where our skin is like the cell membrane? Wouldn't that be simpler for nature? If we were just one giant cell? Seems simpler. Does anybody have an idea why that might be? Why are cells so, like, why are we made of trillions instead of just one big cell? I'm just one big cell walking around. What's that? Okay, so it might be harder to perform some of the functions, like rebuilding tissues, and our bodies are very complicated, right? Maybe the cell's not that complicated. Maybe it can't do all those things. Yeah. Okay, yeah, each cell. So we have to have different kinds of cells. That's a good point. How do you think, if I was to put a chemical in here, maybe glucose is going to come inside this cell. So I'm going to put some glucose in here to power the little machines that are in the cell. How's the glucose going to get from here on the outside to someplace, say, in the middle of this cell? Any idea how it's going to get there? It's just going to drift through the water. That's literally what it's going to do. Same way, if some CO2, which is toxic to the cell, if some CO2 is produced in the middle of this, how does it get out? It's just got to drift through the water. All right? Now, things take a long time to drift through water. If all they're doing is just randomly drifting around, and they have to drift all the way out, it's going to take a long time. We talked about having to get CO2 out of your blood really fast, right? If you want to get something out of a cell really fast, you'd better not have a cell this big. I mean, think about putting like, I'll have to get some for next time, I don't have any dye, but think about putting like a drop of ink in water. It doesn't just instantly spread through the whole thing of water. It slowly moves through the water. It slowly mixes. So basically the reason is, well, there's a couple reasons. The first, for why they're so small, is it has to do with transport. All right? Most things, most chemicals, molecules and compounds move out of the cell, or I should say, I'm going to say through the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the stuff that the cell is made of. By diffusion. Diffusion just means basically they're randomly drifting through the water. Molecules randomly drifting through the water. Now, here we go. The smaller the cell, smaller the cell, the faster you can get stuff into it and out of it. Smaller. Smaller the cell, the shorter the time it takes for stuff to get into the cell, into the center of the cell from outside, or from the center of the cell to the outside. I'm just going to say through the cytoplasm. Remember, the cytoplasm is just the water and stuff that's in the cell. See, here's the thing, and it comes back to what you guys were saying about there being different cell types. The cell doesn't have like, it doesn't really have like blood vessels inside of it. I mean, think about how the blood gets to your, how does oxygen get to all your cells? It doesn't just drift through water to get to your cells. It gets pumped around your body through blood. There's a big pump called your heart that's pumping really fast, and it's pushing that blood all around your body so you can get oxygen really fast. The cell doesn't have that inside. The cell doesn't have a heart to pump and circulate stuff around. Chemicals are just randomly flowing and drifting through the water inside the cell. Life would be really slow if we had to wait for chemicals to just drift randomly through giant cells. You put some chemical in right here, and then it just slowly drifts across the water to get to the other parts of the cell. Right? That wouldn't work. That's what I'm saying. So it's about time. It's about how these things are transported. And he's going to be talking on the video tonight about how things are transported across the membranes. Now let's look at the way things really are. In reality, our cells are very small. There's all kinds of cells, and they're built into different parts of our body. So how does our body move stuff? It doesn't have to wait for things to drift. If your body was just a bag of water, and let's say you drank some sugary stuff, you'd have to wait for that sugar to diffuse through all the water slowly. Just drift. But we don't have to wait for that, right? It gets through once it's into our bloodstream, bam, it's around our body within seconds. Sometimes you eat something real sugary, how long do you have to wait before you get the effect, the sugar high? What do you think? A minute or so, you think? Not very long, right? It kind of depends. Caffeine, same thing. You get a lot of caffeine in you, how long does it take before you start feeling it? It's pretty quick, right? If you were just a big bag of water, you put a caffeine pill right here, it's going to have to dissolve, and then those molecules are going to slowly drift through the water until they've mixed with all the water. That's not going to happen in your body because you've got all this whole circulation system to do that for you. Cells don't have that. So their only answer is to be very small. When they're very small, now things move quickly. Right? You just make everything very small, you make everything very close to each other, and then you don't have to worry about it. So that's why we don't see things with really giant cells like The Blob. You guys know what The Blob is, that old movie? I guess there was a remake, right? The Blob was not realistic because the Blob was like one giant cell. And so it really couldn't move as fast as it did on the movie if it was one giant cell. It would die. It wouldn't be able to live. It's disgusting, that movie. How many have seen that movie? The Blob. So anyway, the Blob's not real, and that's why. Because cells can only be so large, and that's why we have to look at them under microscopes. So that's why we need microscopes. And that's why it took people so long to discover cells, because they didn't have microscopes. Now I just want to show you one other thing, and then I'll shut up. Okay? There's different kinds of microscopes. And this is something that you might have seen in your book. If you looked in your book, there is the light microscope. And that's what we've been using. The light microscope. And the one that we've got is called a compound microscope because it's got all these lenses that work together. got more than one lens. So if it's compound, you see this word compound light microscope, it's got greater than one lens. But what I want to mention today is something called an electron microscope. See, because we need another kind of light microscope. The reason is light microscopes can only go up to about 1000x. Well, maybe 4 or 5000x I think they can get up to with the light microscope. But beyond that, beyond a few thousand power, you can't go any higher. It's because of the wavelength of light. You just literally you can't see anything at higher power than that with light. So what you do is in an electron microscope, instead of shooting light at the object, so instead of shooting light at the object, you actually shoot beams of electrons at the object. So let's say this is a bug right here. You actually shoot a beam of electrons at it, and the beam of electrons is bounced off into a detector, and it makes a picture of the object. And we're talking a million times. You could magnify this. You could magnify this thing a million times with this. And these things are a blast to play around with. I got to use one when I was in grad school, and it's really cool to look at things because you can just, like, there's this big knob on it, and you can just crank it up 1,000 times, 50,000 times, 100,000 times, 500,000 times. And I just want to show you some examples of these images that you can get off of these. This is a picture. What's that? I'll go back to it. This is a picture of the proboscis of some butterfly here. And the kind of detail that you can get with a scanning electron microscope, you could. This one here is actually probably only a few thousand times. So this is definitely not the most you can do with an electron microscope. But let me show you. See if they've got some cells here. What's this one? It's here's some pollen grains. Now, one of the things you notice about these pictures is these are all pictures of the outside of the thing. So these pictures are kind of, scanning electron microscope is more like this, where the light is coming down and you're seeing the actual surface. There are electron microscopes that shine light through. Those are called transmission electron microscopes. But these things can get just much higher power, a lot more detail at the same power of magnification. This looks like some Velcro maybe or something. I think that's Velcro. So with these things we can get a lot higher power. What's this? This is probably the eye of a... This is the eye of a fruit fly. That's the surface of a fruit fly's eye. It's got some kind of little spikes coming off of it. Isn't that weird? We don't have spikes coming out of our eyes. So there's different kinds of microscopes. It depends on what kind of, how close you want to get. And one of the big uses of scanning electron microscopes is in like new materials, developing new materials and stuff. They want to see what their surfaces look like and whether there are any imperfections in them. All right, so your homework for tonight is, what do we got, a few more minutes here? Watch video, answer question. And the video is up on the e-board already. It is, the video is on the cell membrane. And we're going to do our next activity, I think it's assignment number 11 on Wednesday. Cell membrane and cell wall. Don't forget your homework. You got a couple days to do it.